a quick start.
Oh, yeah. All right.
I tell you what, a person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.
All right, so we stopped at the 3 ways to support an argument, and that there are 3 ways to support an argument. And I want to give you a little background on this. This is not something that just, came about, something that the College Board just made up, or something I just made up. Actually, this is very, very old. Aristotle, I don't know if you're familiar with Aristotle. This is why I say, taking a psychology class in high school will help you out here. Aristotle, in his book about rhetoric, basically, he came up with 3 ways in which an individual can present an argument. And in coming up with those 3 ways, then he went about explaining the errors that can be made in those ways when using those. The 3 ways that he mentioned in this book is called, and this is of course Greek, Ethos, Logos, and Pathos. Now, if you've taken a psychology class, you kind of know about this here. Ethos, of course, is the use of evidence such as facts and examples to support claims. It's a word closely related to the word ethics or ethical, because this is a very ethical way to argue a position. Because when you do it this way, you are presenting the facts in an open way. You're letting the reader know what exactly the facts are, so they can determine whether or not the facts support what you're saying. And so this is a very by the book way of presenting evidence. The next is logos, and that's the use of reasoning to develop ideas to connect claims with evidence. That's when you try to reason the audience into agreeing with you. And we're going to get more into that in a moment. But this basically depends on the author's use of inductive or deductive reasoning. And we're going to get to that in a moment. Pathos is, of course, the use of the language in general. That's what it is. The use of the language. And the language is used to incite emotion or used for a visual effect, to wow the reader. And of course, this is the way how the author uses the words and the phrases and all the grammatics and written style, because we're talking about writing right now, and all of the stylistic features of writing in order to convince or to give credibility or to give superiority to what you're saying. If you know how to use all of the writing stylistic features and words and terms in a way that you can elicit a certain reaction from the audience, then you may persuade them even without providing evidence. So we call this, when this is done, we call this pathos. Okay, so now, of course, we want to get down to each individual one and explain it a little more carefully here. Okay, ethos. Ethos, of course, as we said, deals with ethics. It involves the character or credibility of what is being said, and obviously it is the most, if you want to go 100% credible, then you're talking about using ethos, because we're just talking about facts. And there are really only 2 types of facts. Well, there are many different types of facts, but I group them in 2 general ways. Let me put it like that. You got your facts, historical data, statistical data, research testimonies, and then you got observations. You know, they can be personal or specialist, or or some philosophical view of others. Okay, now at this point, before we go to the next way of presenting an argument, we must ask ourselves a question about what we have read, and that is the argument logical or well-reasoned? Okay, is the argument logical or well-reasoned? Because if an argument is not logical, we have to assume that the argument is not valid. Okay, in order to explain that further, I want to talk about the next way in which an author can argue an argument, and that is the use of logos. And logos is reasoning, in essence, is reasoning to develop ideas and connect claims with evidence. And we're coming straight from the SAT essay prompt, because logos, of course, is one of the features that an author can use. And it's reasoning to develop ideas and connect claims with evidence. Now, you can do this, or author can do this in two ways. One, it can be inductive. And inductive is basically going from specific to general, meaning using specific facts and cases to support a general conclusion, okay, or claim. Deductive reasoning is the exact opposite. Is when you take a general case or general cases or facts to come to a very specific conclusion. Now, these are the two ways that an author, when using the feature of logos, the feature of reasoning, these are the two ways that an author is going to go about that process. Okay? So you have to keep in mind while you're reading the passage, if you determine early on that logos is the way that the author is arguing his or her particular position, then you have to be aware that when we're talking about inductive reasoning, okay, it needs a sufficient amount of reliable evidence. And reliable here means evidence that can be trusted by the reader, confirmed by the reader, that is understandable. In other words, it's not like over the reader's head, meaning that they're not a doctor themselves, so how can they understand this information? So I'm going to give you an example. Here's the example. Fair trade agreements have raised the quality of life for coffee producers. So fair trade agreements could be used to help other farmers as well. So what we did is we took a very specific case, coffee producers, and now we're trying to apply that same reasoning to all farmers. Now, the problem with that is the author is not going to present, or will not present, evidence for each farmer. Farmer for tomatoes, farmer for oranges, farmer for corn. They only produce the evidence concerning the farmers of coffee. And now they're trying to apply that to all farmers, saying, well, this is going to work for all farmers. So it can be done if the evidence has been presented. We call that inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is the opposite. This is where we go from general to specific. And there again, it needs a sufficient amount of evidence or reliable evidence. For example, genetically modified seeds have caused poverty, hunger, and a decline in biodiversity everywhere. They have been introduced, so there is no reason the same thing would not occur when genetically modified corn seeds are introduced in Mexico. So here we went from genetically modified seeds everywhere to genetically modified corn seeds in Mexico. So now what we're doing is we're trying to apply this general rule to something very specific. Now, we're not saying that it can't be done, but the evidence has to be there. And that is the crux of what we're talking about here. If you have the evidence, obviously, you're going to be able to support your claim or position. Now, when we're reading an argument of an author, we always have to keep that in mind. Is the evidence sufficient, reliable, credible? And how is the author presenting that evidence? Okay, so now, based on these two ways of reasoning with or connecting the evidence with the claim, we want to talk about the mistakes that can be made here, okay? Because, and we're going to call it mistakes. It's either going to be a mistake or it's going to be manipulation. If the author makes the assumption that the audience is not educated in the subject, and the author makes a mistake or an error in the reasoning, it may be safe to assume that the author did that intentionally to try to manipulate the reader. And as a reader, you're supposed to be able to make that determination. This is why you're being tested on it on the SAT. Can you analyze text enough to know whether or not the author is making a mistake in the reasoning or intentionally making a mistake in the reasoning in order to manipulate the reader? So, there are common errors in reasoning when dealing with logos that we need to be aware of and possibly be able to point out when we are critiquing a work by someone else. The first is the slippery slope. And this is where an author determines that if A happens, then eventually through a process, B, C, X, Y, and Z will happen too. So if we don't want Z to happen, then we have to stop it at B. So let's look at an example to really understand this. If we ban Hummers because they are bad for the environment, eventually the government will ban all cars. So we should not ban Hummers. Now, if the requirement or if the audience's requirement for evidence is very low or not at all, then the audience would accept that as for face value. But as an analytical person, you're supposed to be analyzing. The question you have to ask is, okay, I got the evidence for the Hummer. You provided that. But where's the evidence for the sedan? I mean, the Toyota sedan or Hyundai or what have you. Where's your evidence for that? Because I need to be able to make a determination whether or not those cars are just as environmentally damaging or harming as the Hummer. So with a slippery slope, you don't have to provide, or you're not providing, or you're providing a very one-sided information, but trying to get the reader to agree to the whole picture. And of course, that is an error in reasoning there. The next is the hasty generalization. And this is where you rush to a conclusion without establishing, all of the facts, or establishing facts that are a bit one-sided or biased. For example, even though it is only the first day, I can tell this is going to be a boring course. I mean, it's just the first day. How you know it's going to be boring? I mean, you need more information to go on. But when an author presents an argument in this way, obviously they are not expecting the reader, if it's done intentionally, to require a great amount of proof. Begging the claim, yes, that is when the conclusion that the writer should prove is validated within the claim itself. It's like the statement that is supposed to be proved actually is proved in the statement. And filthy and polluting coal should be banned. I mean, obviously, if the coal is filthy and polluting, yes, it should be banned. There's nothing to really talk about there. The conclusion, the opinion, the position has been made and concluded at the same time, leaving the reader with nothing but, okay, and that's it. So that is definitely an error. You have to present a position in a way that it can be argued and it can be, scrutinized. Okay, circular argument. And this is where you restate the argument rather than actually proving it. For example, George Bush is a good communicator because he speaks effectively. I mean, we need a little more, evidence here because, we need more. I mean, is it just because he speaks effectively? What does that mean? Does that mean that he uses the words right? His pronunciation is good? I mean, we need more information here other than what has been presented. The reasoning here is not good at all. Okay, let's look at another one. We call this red herring, and this is a diversionary tactic. Yes, a diversionary tactic that avoids the key issue. Now, and it also it opposes arguments rather than addresses them. For example, the level of mercury in seafood may be unsafe, but what will fishers do to support their families? So now we started with one subject and we're ending with another subject. I mean, we did this switch here where we started by talking about the mercury, and then we said, well, don't worry about the mercury because they're going to lose money. And the two, aren't connected. They really aren't logically connected together. One, doesn't really connect to the other. I mean, it connects in a really roundabout way, but logically, it's not going to connect in a way that it can be used to support the argument. Okay, so let us move on. Ad populum, an emotional appeal that speaks to positive, such as like patriotism and religion, democracy, or negative, such as terrorism or fascism, rather than dealing with the issue. Okay, for example, if you were a true American, you would support the rights of people to choose whatever vehicle they want. I mean, there's no connection between the two. What does the American have to do with choosing a vehicle? It doesn't make sense. But at the beginning, if you're a true American, and of course everybody goes, I'm true American. So now you are, you're trying to appeal to some emotion here, and obviously we see what you're trying to manipulate us. Yes, but there is no connection here with that. Ad hominem. This is an attack on the character rather than dealing with the argument that that particular person has posed. For instance, Greenpeace's strategies aren't effective because they are all dirty, lazy hippies. I mean, you didn't deal with their strategies and how their strategies aren't good. All you did is say, well, they're bad people, so their strategies must be bad, and that is not going to do anything to support or properly support an argument, your reasoning is not good. Okay. Those errors in support, and that's not all of them. You should be able to navigate at least through some of the errors of support, especially when dealing with reasoning, to determine whether or not the author has made an error in their logos or in that way of presenting the argument, and at least be able to tell or explain why you think that's an error, and use like some of the terminologies that I just used. You can look online and find the full list of errors in argumentation when using reasoning. You should familiarize yourself with a few of them in order to be able to use them, because you have to understand, you're writing a critique essay on an argument. You're being asked to explain the why and the how. So your success in doing that will be determined on your knowledge of the why and how. So this is why it becomes really important to study argumentation. To study the errors that one can make, the types of or the ways in which an author or a person presents an argument, so that when you discuss why you think the author did a good job or bad job at presenting the argument, you can do it in a very academic way. And this is the base of what the new SAT essay is asking you to do. Okay, so we're going to stop here, and we're going to continue with part 3, bringing possibly this whole process of argumentation to a close.
Okay.
In Islamic school.
We'll talk about tomorrow. Yeah, that's rolling the hard way. We don't want to roll quite that hard. We want to get one of them little minibuses.
What's up?
A person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.
Everybody's gone out of their mind.
Welcome to Mr. Quick's class.
Welcome to Mr. Quick's class. Welcome to Mr. Quick's class. Welcome, Mr. Quick's class.
Oh, yeah. All right. All right.